The fog hung thick over Hollow Creek as John drove his aging Jeep down the cracked, winding road that led to the town. He had heard stories, vague whispers about the place, but nothing had prepared him for the oppressive stillness that seemed to crawl up his spine. The moment he crossed the town line, the headlights cut through the dense mist in narrow beams, illuminating only fragments of the landscape of broken fence here, a leafless tree there before they disappeared into the gray haze. His camera rested on the passenger seat, lens cap off, ready to capture what he hoped would be eerie, yet striking photographs of the town's abandoned structures. The streets were empty, save for the occasional scurry of a stray dog or the rustle of leaves carried on a sudden, sharp gust of wind. Every so often, John caught glimpses of movement at the corner of his eye, shadows slipping between the houses. Gone the instant he looked directly. His heart thudded, but he forced himself to keep driving, following the map he had printed out earlier. Each street lined with dilapidated homes whose windows were cracked or boarded up. The wooden signs at the entrances of the town creaked in the wind, warning of decay and abandonment more than any official danger. Finally, he arrived at the edge of Hollow Creek's old district, where the trees pressed close to the narrow roads and the mist seemed almost alive, curling around the trunks and low-hanging branches. He parked the Jeep near the curb, grabbed his camera, and stepped onto the uneven sidewalk, the gravel crunching beneath his worn boots. The air was heavy, damp, and cold, carrying the faint taint of mold and rot. Each breath felt thicker, harder to inhale, as if the fog itself were trying to suffocate him. John's eyes were drawn to a large, crumbling building ahead. Its paint had long since peeled away, revealing weathered wood that had been scarred by decades of storms. Broken shutters hung loosely from their hinges, and the front door sagged on its frame. Slightly ajar, the house seemed to lean toward him, its empty windows like dark, unblinking eyes. He could feel a low hum in the air, almost imperceptible, like the town itself was holding its breath. He lifted his camera, the lens focusing, trying to steady his hand as the hairs on his neck stood on end. As he approached, the wind shifted. A sudden, cold breeze whipped through the alleyways, carrying with it faint whispers. Too soft to understand, yet unmistakably human. John paused, heart hammering. "Hello," he called, his voice trembling slightly. The fog swallowed his words, and the answer was only silence. Still, he pressed on, stepping onto the warped wooden porch. Each board groaned under his weight, echoing far too loudly in the stillness inside. The air was colder, almost icy. Dust swirled in the pale beam of his flashlight, making the space seem alive with tiny motes of movement. The smell of decay was stronger here, mixed with something metallic, sharp, that made him gag. He took a step forward, his camera clicking quietly as he tried to capture the shadows that seemed to cling to the corners. Every room told a story of neglect, a chair overturned, books scattered and yellowed with age, cobwebs stretching across door frames. Yet, it wasn't just abandonment that made the house unsettling. It was the feeling that he wasn't truly alone. John's footsteps echoed in the narrow hallway, and he froze as he thought he heard another set of steps, light and tentative, behind him. He spun around, flashlight sweeping the room, but nothing stirred in the shadows. Just his imagination, he told himself. Yet every instinct in his body screamed that he was being watched. The living room was vast and cavernous, the ceiling too high, shadows pooling like ink in the corners. On the far wall, a series of old family portraits hung crookedly, their subjects' eyes eerily lifelike even in the dim light. John stepped closer, peering at the faded faces. The eyes seemed to follow him, almost imperceptibly, shifting whenever he turned away. He swallowed hard and raised his camera again, trying to capture the unsettling tableau. But the photos always came out strangely distorted, the faces blurry, almost as if they were moving on their own. He moved deeper into the house, past a staircase that groaned under his weight, and found himself in a narrow hallway lined with more closed doors. Each one exuded its own peculiar energy, the air around them thicker, heavier, almost pulsating. John's skin prickled as if tiny electric currents were crawling beneath it. A faint sound came from the end of the hollow soft scrape, like fingernails dragging along wood. His flashlight trembled slightly in his hands as he pointed it toward the source. The mist outside the broken window made it hard to see, but he swore he saw a shadow dart across the floor, gone before he could focus. He paused, breath shallow, heart racing. The whispers returned, louder this time, threading through the fog that had begun to seep in through the cracks in the windows. They weren't forming words he could understand, but the tone was unmistakable, warning, malice, a promise that he should not be here. He clenched the camera tighter, gripping it as though it could somehow shield him from whatever watched from the darkness. In the farthest room, John found an old, ornate mirror standing alone against the wall. Its surface was dull and speckled with grime, but as he stepped closer, he felt a strange pull, an almost magnetic tug at his chest. He raised the camera, peering through the viewfinder, and froze. The reflection was not his own. In the dim light, a dark figure lingered behind him, hunched and twisted, its form barely discernible yet undeniably there. He spun around, flashlight swinging wildly, but the room was empty. Only the mirror remained, its glass catching the faintest glint of something unnatural. Panic began to bubble in his chest. He took a step back, then another, the floorboards groaning with each retreat. But the sensation of being watched did not abate. It grew heavier, more suffocating. Shadows seemed to coil along the walls, stretching toward him, and the whispers became more insistent, brushing against his ears like icy fingers. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to escape the house and the oppressive mist that clung to its edges. John's flashlight flickered. The air seemed to thicken, making it hard to move, hard to breathe. He could feel the pulse of something in the house, subtle yet unrelenting, sensing almost with his own heartbeat. He swallowed hard, fighting the rising tide of fear, knowing he had come too far to turn back now. He lifted his camera one more time, snapping a photo of the mirror, and the click echoed like a gunshot in the silence. In that instant, the figure in the mirror shifted. It moved closer, stretching impossibly, its form blurring the line between shadow and flesh. John stumbled back, heart pounding, camera dangling from his neck. The whispers crescendoed into a low, guttural hiss that filled the entire room, vibrating through the floorboards. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the noise stopped. The house fell silent again, but the feeling of being watched lingered, heavier than before, pressing down on him, warning him that what had been awakened would not let him leave. He backed toward the door, hands shaking, trying to convince himself that it was all a trick of the fog and the shadows. But deep down, he knew that Hollow Creek was alive in a way he could not understand. Something in the house had noticed him, had marked him, and the mirror had shown him only a glimpse of what waited. With one last, trembling glance at the darkened hallway and the whispering mist, he stepped back, ready or perhaps resigned to face whatever lay ahead. John's chest heaved as he stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a loose floorboard. The mirror loomed in the corner, its surface now flickering with a faint, crimson light that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. He wanted to tear his eyes away, to run from the house entirely, but something rooted him to the spot, an invisible force pressing him forward, daring him to see what lay within the glass. Shadows stretched and writhed across the walls as if the very air had thickened into something alive. The whispers returned, louder this time, twisting and coiling around him, in tones that promised despair and a fate he could not escape. Every instinct screamed at him to flee, but the doors he had entered through were no longer where they should have been. The hallway behind him had stretched impossibly, elongating in the dim light. The staircase he had descended to reach the lower floor seemed to vanish, replaced by a dark corridor that sloped downward into pitch blackness. Panic clawed at him, and he bolted toward what he thought was the front door. It slammed shut before he could reach it, the sound echoing through the house like a gunshot, reverberating into every corner and filling him with a cold, hollow dread. John pressed his hands against the door, rocking it, but it would not budge. The whispers became sharper, more insistent, threading into words that made his stomach churn. "You belong here," one hissed. "You can't leave." Another voice, closer and lower, breathed directly into his ear, though no one was there. The air thickened, damp and heavy, smelling faintly of iron and decay, almost as though the house were bleeding. He stepped back, heart hammering, as shadows began to detach from the walls. They slithered across the floor, curling around corners, moving toward him with deliberate intent. In a surge of desperate energy, John spun around, searching for an escape, and saw the mirror again. The red light was brighter now, spilling out into the room, forming shapes he could not identify, figures that moved in impossible angles, stretching and contorting as if reality itself were bending around them. He felt a presence brush against his shoulder, icy and fleeting, making him shiver violently. The whispers had turned into hissing laughter, echoing from every surface, bouncing off the walls and ceiling until it seemed to come from inside his own skull. A sudden, sharp creak drew his gaze upward. The ceiling above him appeared to pulse, shadows moving like crawling insects, limbs stretching down toward him, reaching, grasping. John's camera slipped from his hands, clattering to the floor, the lens cap bouncing across the boards. He lunged for it instinctively, but something cold and solid grabbed at his ankle. He twisted, screaming, tearing his foot free, but the sensation lingered, a weight pressing down, invisible yet undeniable. Panic overtook him, and he ran, blindly, through the endless hallways, the fog and darkness swallowing his path. The house seemed to shift around him. Each door he tried to open led to a different room, unfamiliar, more dilapidated, more sinister than the last. In one room, the walls were smeared with something dark, wet, and glistening in the faint red light of the mirror. He caught a fleeting glimpse of shapes pressed against the walls, faces contorted in silent screams, eyes black voids staring directly at him. His stomach turned as if he had swallowed ice, and bile rose in his throat. But he forced himself onward, driven purely by survival instinct. Eventually, he found himself in what appeared to be a small bedroom. Dust lay thick across the floor, and the furniture was overturned, decayed beyond recognition. The whispers had become a low, continuous chant, almost hypnotic, calling him deeper into the house. John collapsed against the wall, panting, trying to steady his racing thoughts. He could feel the weight of the house pressing in on him, as if the walls themselves were alive, breathing in sync with his terrified heartbeat. Then he saw it, a thin, almost imperceptible trail of mist curling along the floor, glowing faintly red as it wound toward a narrow doorway at the far end of the room. The mirror's light seemed to stretch along it, casting the shadows into long, serpentine shapes. Something urged him forward, a compulsion he could not resist. Trembling, he rose to his feet and stepped toward the doorway. Each step felt like wading through water, thick and resistant, as though the house itself were trying to swallow him as he reached the doorway. The red light from the mirror flared, engulfing the room in a hellish glow. The whispers became intelligible, overlapping voices that screamed in unison, "You cannot escape. You are ours now. You belong." John's stomach turned and a cold sweat poured down his face. He tried to back away, but the floor beneath him was gone, replaced by a void that seemed to stretch endlessly. The walls closed in, breathing, exhaling cold mist that wrapped around his body. From the corner of his eye, he saw movement. The shadows from the walls were no longer mere shapes, they had taken form. Figures, humanoid yet grotesque, twisted and contorted, their limbs too long, their heads turned at impossible angles, silently advancing toward him. Their eyes glowed faintly red, mirroring the mirror's light, and their mouths opened in silent screams that he could feel vibrating through his bones. Panic turned to pure terror, and John stumbled back, tripping over the threshold into the next room. The room was empty, or so it appeared. The red light had dimmed, leaving him in near darkness. The whispers, now soft but sharp enough to pierce his mind, "Look," trembling. He turned slowly, and the mirror was there again. But this time it stood on the floor, no longer against the wall. In its reflection, he saw not only himself, but the countless shadowy figures standing behind him, stretching back into the mist. Their faces were featureless, yet he could feel their intent, their hunger. John screamed, and the sound was swallowed by the house. He lunged for the mirror, intending to smash it, but it was heavier than it should have been, as if weighted with the very darkness that had taken root in the house. The reflection shimmered, and for a brief moment, he saw himself being pulled into the glass, his body twisting and contorting with the shadows, disappearing into the crimson mist. He recoiled in horror, tripping backward, and the mirror fell, cracking in slow motion, sending shards scattering across the floor. The red light flared once more, and then vanished, plunging the room into near total darkness. John's breathing came in ragged gasps, his mind reeling from what he had witnessed. The whispers ceased, replaced by a suffocating silence, thicker than the fog outside. He felt the weight of the house settle around him, oppressive, unyielding, and he knew with chilling clarity that Hollow Creek had claimed him. It had marked him, watched him, and would not release him. He stumbled toward what he thought was the front door, only to find it gone, replaced by another endless corridor. Every step echoed too loudly, bouncing off the walls like the heartbeat of the house itself. Shadows stretched toward him, elongated and amorphous, wrapping around his legs, crawling up his body. He screamed again, but no sound escaped his lips. The house swallowed it, leaving him in a world of silence and fog, broken only by the soft, almost imperceptible, scuttling of unseen entities. John collapsed to his knees in the center of the corridor. The crimson mist from the mirror now seeped along the floor, curling around him like tendrils of smoke. He could feel the shadows pressing closer, their cold, invisible fingers brushing against his skin, pulling at his very essence. The whispers returned, softer now, but insistent, like a lullaby from the depths of a nightmare.
Please like and subscribe channel Fear Frequency for more horror stories. Thank you.